You got nothing left to lose tonight. In the end we'll see a change. Only love lasts, only love. In the night we shall go in. Won't you follow me down, 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 down? It's the crime of the century we fight, but the reason are we everyone we left behind. Till life is brought back to every kind. Give me everything you got. Let's leave this world behind.
Good evening, everybody. Jacob Daniel here. This is the Daniel 3 podcast, and yeah, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. As always, I have to start with my sponsor. We got Rabbit Eye Blueberry Wine, my good friend Will Bell down in Georgia, fellow Mises Caucus member and good friend. You've probably seen me, if you watch Reed Coverdale's show, you've probably seen me and him go back and forth on Reed's show a few times because Reed does a little. If you haven't seen it, you should go watch it. It's we call it the Capitalist Communion, and we have a little like atheist Christian roundtable and have some good conversations over some blueberry wine, and it's all good fun. But I'm not much of a wine drinker, but I like this, so I would definitely recommend it. If and you know the nice thing is that they have a little bit of like a wide variety. So they have like super sweet wine, and then they have like dry wine and everything in between. So again, that's rabbiteyewine.com. Other than that, the website is back up finally. And we had a lot of I switched hosts, and then like the I don't know, something like some kind of like weird error happened, and we had to consult like 3 different specialists to like figure out what the bug was and to get it fixed. So, but the website's back up, daniel318.com. And if you want to, support the show at all, it's patreon.com/biblical anarchy. That's pretty much it. I have Jose coming back on the show either tomorrow or next week. We're still trying to get our schedules figured out. But I'm excited to have my guest on tonight. He is the 2020 vice chair candidate of the Libertarian Party. He is the founder of You Are the Power, and he is one of my favorite voices in the libertarian movement, the one and only Spunk Cohen. Spunk, how you doing tonight?
Spunk Cohen.
Spunk Cohen, that's right, yeah.
Spunk Cohen, yes.
It's an upgrade over it's an upgrade over Tasha's spouse. So I mean we're getting there.
I mean, sure, it's kind of my name, so we're getting there. I did recently what was it? Was that this week or last week? I was very briefly for several million people, I was a guy on Twitter named Spike Cohen. So it was Tucker Carlson shared
right,
something.
yeah, that was cool.
And I don't know what 20 million people who ever watched that. So he did say Spike Cohen, but I was a guy on Twitter named Spike Cohen, which is it is my name, and I am a guy, and I am on Twitter, so nothing was inaccurate. I feel like we're getting there. It's like baby steps. One day, someone's just going to be like Spike Cohen, who is his own person in his own right. But we're not there yet, so we're working on it. One day I'll be enough.
Self ownership. That's what we're about. We'll
yes, exactly.
Yeah, we'll get it there. So I feel like you don't need too much of an introduction, so I don't want to spend too much time on that
Sure.
kind of
Yeah.
stuff. You've been on the show
Okay.
before. I think everyone
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
knows who you are. But we're coming off of we're 2 weeks removed now, I guess, just about from the Libertarian National
Yep.
Convention at Reno.
Yes.
That's been talked to death a little bit on various different shows, so I don't want to spend another hour and a half beating
Sure.
that already dead and pulverized horse. But I don't
Hmm.
know. Maybe you wanted to review Reno a little bit, and also kind of maybe
Sure. Sure.
review, although it's not been that long. Maybe review, kind of maybe any things you've seen since then, and if you think that people are kind of moving in a positive direction or not. I wasn't able to attend, but I watched live, and so I was able to see everyone's speeches, including yours, which I thought was
Hmm.
a needed voice of reason,
Yes.
which you always try to be, and I appreciate that. But yeah, what did you think of the convention? What was it like? Highlights, lowlights, and what's your kind of, I don't know, thoughts on where we're at, now kind of 2 weeks removed, and what the outlook is?
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm happy to beat this, as you put, already dead horse until it's just flush with the surface of the ground that it's on. Like there's no longer a horse. It's basically a horse shape on the asphalt. No. Yeah. It was a shame that you weren't there. There were some incredible speakers, and you would have also gotten herd immunity. Because or helped contribute to herd immunity, because I think I got COVID there. Thankfully, it was way more mild than when I got it earlier this year. But yeah, no, everyone got COVID, so that was something. I guess that was the low light, if you want to think of it that way. Although we all have great immunity coming into the summer, so maybe that's a highlight. But in terms of the convention itself, um, I suspected that what was going to happen was going to happen. I knew that the Mises caucus would have the largest faction there, but I suspected that they would come in dominant, like, 2/3, 3/4, something like that, because I had been to so many state conventions where that's what they were doing there. And I thought, well, you multiply that times 50, and there, you've got 50,
Yeah.
40 plus of the state conventions that were dominated by the Mises caucus, and they were going to come in, and they also, unlike any of the other, I guess, factions, really at this point, there's Mises versus anti-Mises. They had an agenda, whether you agree with the agenda or not. They had one, and it was very explicit what they were going to do, and they had a game plan for implementing it, and everyone else was just against it. Or actually, there were some people in the middle who weren't
I was
really
gonna say,
sure
like,
what
I
they thought
feel,
about. Yeah,
yeah,
but I want to say the other like formed
faction.
faction
Yeah, the other people aren't
was
really a
against it.
faction. They're just kind of like the people who haven't really picked a side in the quote unquote culture war within the Libertarian Party. They're
Yep,
just like just
they
the
want to do stuff. They want to
yeah,
get
the ones
stuff
who wanted,
done. Yep.
exactly. Yep. So
And I
I,
think what ended up happening was a good number of those people ended up going with Mises once the convention was underway, because they thought, well, that's who's doing it. They have an agenda. Let's try it. They've clearly, here's the thing. Whatever criticism you want to give about Mises, and full disclosure, I've been in the Mises caucus since I think 2 days after it was formed. I'm typically in any group I'm in, I'm probably the oldest member of the Mises caucus, unless Michael is there. But I was pretty fairly outspoken in being against the whole idea of the takeover language and the sort of the narrative behind it. I thought it was kind of overly adversarial. I think that I would have preferred more of a messaging of, we have a bold new direction for the party, and we invite you to join us, as opposed to, these people are bad, they're losers, and we're going to take over. It worked. It
yeah.
worked. I never thought it wouldn't necessarily work. I just thought that it was going to create a lot more division than it needed to. Ultimately, they won, right? They came in, they had the best numbers. It wasn't even close, and they completely dominated every single aspect of the convention. The two things I want people that I hope people are walking away from it with are that, number one, no one has died. This is not there wasn't a purge. People weren't put up against a wall. No one was guillotined or put in a gulag. A faction took over the party. And if they do really well, which I hope they do, because I want this party to grow and I want this movement to grow, then we'll do great. And if they don't, if they utterly fail, well, then we will have learned our lesson and we can move forward from that. And more than likely, there's going to be successes and failures. We can maximize on the successes, we can learn from the failures, and we can move forward from there. And if you are still, deeply against this, bring more people. You have to organize. Party politics, both internally and externally, is all about bringing more people to show up than anyone else to have them on your side. That's what it's all about. So bring more people next time. If you are happy about how things are going and you want to make sure that Mises continues to stay in charge, bring more people. So it comes down, I'm distilling it down to its basic thing. Party politics is about bringing more people. The other takeaway I want to get is that, unfortunately, no one wanted to try to compromise at all with Mises and see if there were ways that they could work together for the most part. So, for example, it was basically Mises' way or the highway for the entire convention. And that wasn't 100% their fault, because no one was really trying to work with them.
Well, really, until you were the one exception to that.
The one exception to that was with the bigotry wording. I
Yeah.
understood why they wanted to remove the bigotry wording. There's nowhere else in the platform that makes a moral judgment about someone's actions or behavior other than saying you shouldn't force anything on anyone else. So, like, we don't say the government shouldn't tell you what you can put in your body, but heroin's really bad and it's bad for you and it could ruin your life. We don't say the government has no business telling consenting adults what kind of sexual relationships they can get in, but having lots of unprotected sex can lead to, with multiple unknown partners, can lead to STDs and unplanned pregnancy. Like, we don't do that. So this was the one time that we're going, but this is really bad and we condemn it. The problem is, if you remove it, it looks like we're kind of saying that we're okay with that, right? Like, that's what it looks like, is we're going, actually, we don't really think bigotry is bad. We don't have a problem with bigotry. We're cool with bigotry. So my compromise, which I kind of came up with, I had a couple people reach out to me and say, are you cool with the compromise language? And I said, well, what's the compromise? What's the language? And they said, well, we were hoping you'd do that. And I'm like, all right, cool. So I talked with Angela McArdle. I talked with Michael. I talked with some non-Mises people that wanted to work on it. I talked with some prominent people in the movement, a couple prominent donors and so forth, that were saying that they were going to leave the party if this was just removed. And so I kind of crafted some wording. And what I came up with was, we uphold and defend the rights of every person, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or any other aspect of their identity. And everyone either thought it was an acceptable compromise or better than the wording it was replacing. And so it passed almost unanimously.
I think it's kind of both. You know what I mean? Because I think that I kind of agree with you that in a maybe like short term, at least, there might be a like short term cost that we have to like just take that bitter pill and swallow it, because some people might look at it just initially and go like, oh, they removed the bigotry plank and
you're cool
they'll
with
take
bigotry,
it uncharitable look.
Yep.
But like, that's, to me, like, that's not going to be a narrative that lasts very long. That might last a month or two. People might reference it down the road, but anyone who actually looks at the platform and sees what it's been replaced with, I think it is a better plank now with the new language, because rather than just kind of like, ill bigotry, we find that disgusting. Now it's like, no, like, what are we going to do about people who irrationally collectivize groups of people? It's no matter what group you belong to, no matter how you identify, like, you have the same rights as everybody else, and we're going to fight to protect those rights. So I think it's actually an improvement, even if there's a bitter pill to take at the onset.
There was going to be a bitter pill to begin with, and they had the numbers. They had the numbers to amend the wording, and they already said that even if they didn't have the numbers because it takes 2/3 to do a suspension of the rules to amend the wording. They said, if we have to just remove that entire plank, which only takes a simple majority, then we'll do that. So it was going to happen. And the reason I brought it up is that there are times where you can work with a dominant faction and not even come to them with a, hey, this is going to help something pass, that you won't be able to get past otherwise, but come to them and say, hey, what do you think of this? Maybe this is better. Maybe this is something that can work better and get even more support. And there was zero opposition from Mises or from any of the people that were against it. But up until that point, no one was talking to each other. And there's nothing magical about that. It's just literally talk to people.
And like, so like, I'll agree with you that perhaps the takeover rhetoric, like, I mean, it is what it is at this point. It's over and done with. But like,
It's done.
could
Yeah.
a better message have been chosen from the onset? Like, it's possible. I mean, I think it's clearly possible because as
Mhm.
much as it maybe inspired people in like, in my camp, so to speak, it also turned off some people who I think are good libertarians and they might feel a
Would have
little
been
bit
on your side.
disenfranchised,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. Yep.
But on the flip side, uh there weren't a lot of people who were approaching us. I won't say none, just not a lot compared to what seemed to be, there weren't many people approaching us in good faith compared to the amount of people who would go, well, you guys are just right wing Trumpist, extremists and bigots,
Oh
and
yeah.
we
Yep.
demand
Yep.
X, Y, and Z. And if you don't do that, then it's like we're just going to rage quit or just keep calling you names on the internet. And it's like, well, that's not fertile ground for anything to be done.
It's also
Whereas,
not much of a threat, right? Like
yeah, that too.
it has been interesting to watch people who fancy themselves political strategists and activists saying, if you don't do what we say, we are going to do a series of things that arguably help you. Like, we're going to not present a viable alternative. We're going to not organize to bring more people. We're going to do this kind of like cloak and dagger, shenanigan stuff with the rules to make you look more sympathetic to someone who's kind of on the fence on this whole thing. We're going to give you the moral victories by trying to purge you. We're going to say how upset we're about it constantly, which actually energizes you because that was fine with you for us to be upset. Like, every action we take is going to, if at the least, not hurt you, and at most help you politically. So you better do what we say. And it didn't work. I told Michael and quite a few people. I've said it on a few shows as well. All last year, when people were coming up to me and saying, well, we have to stop the Mises Caucus, I've been upfront with saying, listen, I want all sorts of competition. I want as many different competing groups bringing all sorts of new blood in and having a wide, robust debate marketplace of ideas of how to move this party forward, and then go and all do it our different ways, not even have to just pick one way. So I was telling people, listen, if you want to stop Mises, look at what they're doing. They're making this fun. They are gamifying it. They're making this an immersive experience for the people that are joining their caucus. You need to do that too. And they didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't. So Mises won. Could Mises have done better with choosing less inflammatory rhetoric regarding the takeover or whatever? Because I know people that like align with the goals and values of Mises, but they didn't like that. They perceived
Yeah.
it as an invasion. We're libertarians. We kind of naturally, bristle against a perceived invasion, right? So I think it could have been better, but ultimately it didn't really matter because they were the only ones who had a solid ground game for organizing. And so they did it. Going back real quick to the compromise wording, the analogy I've been using is this. If you are if you're someone who has people in power who are threatening you and threatening to oppress you, threatening to marginalize you, threatening to harm you with the power of the state, let's say it's because of your skin color or your ethnicity or your sexual identity, whatever, your gender identity, it doesn't matter, for something that you don't have any control over, because of their bigotry towards you, they're using the power of government to infringe upon you, to make your life harder, and ultimately to harm you. And there are two people witnessing this. And one of them says, I condemn this. It's irrational, and arguably, even worse than that, it's repugnant. Okay.
Yeah.
And then another person is standing there and goes, I will do everything I can to advocate for you, to uphold your rights, and to defend your rights, because this isn't right and no one should be treated this way. Which of those people do you think is going to be a more effective ally against you who are being harmed by actual, not just bigotry, someone's bad opinion about you, but actual like systemic bigotry, actual people in power using their power to hurt you because they hate you? Which one of those is something that's you think is going to be more helpful? Someone condemning the fact that it's happening, or someone pledging to actually fight alongside you to fix it?
Yeah, exactly. And the latter actually is I think more effective too, just because like I was never offended by that plank, but I understood why a lot of fellow
I get it. I get
people
it. Yeah.
wanted to remove it because we've kind of been on the receiving end of that word being weaponized and really the
There's
meaning of
that
that
too,
word
yeah.
being obfuscated by I think the political left over like the last decade especially. I remember even like this is part of what, because I used to be registered Democrat and Bernie Sanders supporter before I became a libertarian, but I never really got into the like full blown like woke stuff and kind of like
Yeah.
wanting to call everything racism because it just seemed silly to me. It was just like I don't know. It is what it is. I think that's been talked a lot about, but I
Oh,
agree
yeah.
with
Yeah.
you. I think that um, I like the new wording better, and if people don't like it, like I don't know,
Oh,
it's
oh,
fine. I get why the optics of removing it might look bad initially, but it's like again, like now what's happened since then? Have you seen the LNC Twitter go out there and make a bunch of like tweets about how we hate minorities or something? Like no, it's if anything, it was funny because we made a tweet on like I don't know within the first couple days of Pride Month about LGBT rights.
yeah.
And then
Yeah.
we had some people on like, maybe the far right side of the camp going like, oh, you guys are
You're
just as woke as the
pandering.
last
You're
regime.
woke.
And I
No,
was like,
it's no
oh my
change. Yeah, I did
gosh.
see
I was
that.
like, I was like, no, okay, now you're just being silly. I was like,
And,
like we
and then and what was interesting was there were people saying, "Oh, you're just as woke," and it's like, no, they're literally saying they defend everyone's rights and that government shouldn't be involved in your relationships. That's a explicitly
it's woke
libertarian
now.
message.
I don't know.
That's not, yeah, that's woke. That's now woke. Acknowledging that there are different people that are in different subgroups that are
Right.
uniquely
Acknowledging well,
affected
somebody
by
literally told me it was the fact that you used the term LGBT. I was like, wait, are we not allowed to like
oh, is
acknowledge
that
that gay and trans people exist now? Like,
exist.
is it
Yeah, no, and that, but it would be like saying like the focusing on the fact that some of these COVID regime restrictions were especially harmful to the parents of young children whose development was delayed as a result of not getting the access to education and things like that, and people going, but what about like high school kids and adults too? It affected that. Why are we pandering to children and parents? Like it's you can acknowledge that there's a specific group or subgroup of people who are acutely or more acutely affected by a specific thing as an example of the overarching message of you should
yeah.
have control over yourself and ownership of yourself. It's just otherwise all we would tweet is you own yourself, no one should tell you what to do, and then the next day you own yourself and no one should tell you what. Like it's you have to, you're messaging to what people are talking about. There's nothing wrong with that. But then I saw on the other side that there were people going, see, this is the problem. They don't understand that the problem is not government harming, gender and sexual minorities. It's the bigotry of people that won't accept them. No. The problem is
The
when that
violence
is
and the
put to power.
right.
The problem is not someone going, I don't know, the gay people that just don't sit right with me. The problem is when that person or some other person uses the government to enforce their bigotry. We talk a lot about like systemic racism, systemic bigotry, and the left and really the right too wants you to focus on the racism part or the bigotry part. Libertarians would like you to focus on the systemic part.
Right.
Without the system in place to harm people, regardless of why they're harming them, whether it's because of your race, your ethnicity, or just because you're in their way, which more often than not is why it is, because they're predators and you're prey. But whatever it is, if you get rid of that gun, it doesn't matter what the person who was wielding it thinks about you, because they don't have a gun to use against you anymore. And I hope moving forward, and I've already started seeing it, and I liked it in that LGBT tweet. I liked it in what I've seen so far from the Libertarian Party social media and in coordination with the state affiliates. I'm going to admit I haven't seen every single thing. I've been really busy with You Are the Power, so there may be something that I would look and say, oh, I'm not sure what I thought of that. But overall, everything I've seen has been putting it back to what actually matters. Take the power out of the hands of these craven, pandering politicians and do-nothing bureaucrats and the billionaire cronies that sponsor them. And put it back in your hands. That's what
Right.
matters. That is the core of our message. And if we stick to that, I think it's an inherently intuitive message. It's one that makes sense. It's an inherently populist message. We're literally saying power to the people and actually meaning it. And I think it's a winning message. I think if we stick with it, it's a winning message.
Yeah. And I think some people on both maybe extremes just don't understand that, like, uh, again, criticisms can sometimes be very warranted. I'm not somebody who would say
Oh,
that the Mises
absolutely.
Caucus has
Yeah.
always, there have been things that I've been critical about, but I think overall, the way I looked at it is that like the push has been to bring the LP back to a more principled and more thin libertarian approach, not really hyper focusing on either side of the culture war. Now, because and this is my opinion, and some people can feel free to disagree, but I think up until this takeover, that the dominant culture and direction the LP was going was, to a certain extent, leaning more towards the quote unquote left side of the culture war.
I think it's socially libertine, right? Like people
Yeah,
that they're not just saying that you have the right to do it. They're saying, and we agree with it and we're cool
right,
with it.
right,
Like we
right.
personally like it, which that still has a place in the movement, right? Like that. I consider myself, I live personally very traditionally. I'm a monogamous married man. I don't do drugs. I don't even drink. I don't even drink coffee. I'm almost Mormon. And I'm like, I'm pretty traditional in that way. But I also am like pretty open and accepting of however anyone is choosing to live, as long as they're not hurting anyone else. I'm not just tolerant; I'm actually accepting. But that's me,
Right.
and that. But I'm also accepting of people who don't think that way, as long as they don't want to harm anyone else. I don't have to agree with your opinions on society. That's the whole point of libertarianism. We need to declare a truce between people who think this way about society and cultural things, and people who think
Exactly.
this
Yeah.
way,
But
as long as we all agree that we should not be forcing ourselves on others, right? And I
yeah,
think the party, as a political party, should be keeping as much of a skeleton framing around
yeah.
just saying, we support your rights, we support your right to do all of these different things, and we leave it up to individual people whether they like it or not. And that's really what it is. I really think we should be doing that.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to get at, is that like
Yeah.
there's people on both sides who think that our thin libertarianism is too thin, because some people will conflate it with their more libertine, socially progressive outlook of
Yeah.
libertarianism, and then some people, and like I have to deal with this on my side because I'm more of a like conservative Christian,
Right. Right.
but it's like so. I think we talked about this a little bit last time on your show. It's like I tend to have conservative views of and religious views of what marriage is. It's between a man and a woman. I
Sure.
don't really have the same views on sex or gender identity that people on the opposite side of the aisle of me would have. But it's
Right.
like, but I'm not trying to make libertarianism Christianity. I just don't
Right.
want you to make libertarianism the opposite, either. It's like, let's just agree to like, let's end, as you said eloquently, let's just end the systemic oppression of all these different groups,
Anyone
and then
of
you have
everyone.
freedom of association, and I think
Yes.
that's what so, and I think not perfectly, but the Mises Caucus has been attempting to come back to more of that sort of thin libertarianism. But if you're on the left, you're kind of going like, oh, you're moving towards the right, therefore this is like you're moving to the right, not towards maybe more of like a center. And then the
Yeah.
people on the right go, oh, you're still on the left. You didn't come all the way over here where I'm at. And it's just like,
Right.
well, it's just, I don't know. I find it annoying because I get it on both sides constantly. It's just like, oh, you're enabling degeneracy, or you're a bigot. It's like, guys, make up your mind, okay?
I
Can't be
can't be
both.
both of these things. I cannot be both a alt-right entryist and a degenerate cuck. Like it's
Right.
one or the other. Like there has to be a can we come up the perfect can we come up with a compromise between I'm a degenerate cuck and I'm an alt-right entryist? No, I think that, and now I will say this. I have seen, not from party affiliates or anything like that, but from some individuals we'll start with the Mises side because it's been on both sides, but on the Mises side, who will veer past just, I don't agree with that, and actually like saying like harmful things towards particularly like gay people, gender and sexual minorities, and so forth. Some racial stuff, but more so, it's really more the LGBT stuff, right? Like making memes, making fun of trans people killing themselves and stuff like that. That's unacceptable. And when I say unacceptable, I don't want to associate with that. It's not, it should be illegal. It's, I don't want to be around that. And I don't want any leadership in the party having anything to do with that. In the same token, I have seen times when people have made similar comments about someone like you, who is a more conservative religious person, more traditional and doesn't believe in these things. And these are like to dehumanize someone and to say terrible things about them because they're
Which is
living
kind
their
of what
life, or
bigotry is.
it
If we're
kind
gonna
of is
get
bigotry. It's kind of the exact textbook definition of
yeah,
bigotry, which is an intolerance of the opinions of others, right? Or the intolerance of different ideas or something like that, right? So that's bad, and we shouldn't have that anywhere near the party leadership or towards the messaging within the party. It's not. It should be illegal. That's not the foot we should be putting forward, and we should be. When I see that, I distance myself from people like that because I don't want to be personally associated with them. Again, free association. But I think outside of that, I think that there are going to be people in the movement that think that, Christianity and Islam and Judaism and religion in general is just a bunch of hocus pocus superstition. And there are going to be people who think that, that is that we should be living by the word of God, whatever, whether it's the Bible, the Tanakh, Bhagavad Gita, or the Quran or whatever else. And that's how they think. We need to have some truces here. Like, as long as the things that are that thin
no,
line and
Spike.
thin
If we take
libertarianism.
control of the state and try to conquer the culture, it'll work this time.
Yes, absolutely. The government, when our culture, whatever that is, takes over government, it will suddenly work and not totally backfire.
We
in
don't
all
have
of our faces.
thousands of years of history to prove that this doesn't
Yes.
work.
We don't have the entirety of pretty much the post Babylonian Empire, like from there moving forward, showing us that government is a uniquely bad way to organize people, right? But as long as, I think the one thing that we need to stick to is, I don't want to force my opinion on you. As long as you're not hurting anyone else, as long as you're not harming anyone else, whether I love what you're doing and want to join you in it, or whether I think it's absolutely terrible and don't want to even be within smelling distance of it, then I don't, which can be pretty far with some things. But whatever it is, as long as we don't want to, the way we're going to build the kind of big tent movement we need is to allow for people that have differences of opinions on how people should live. And as long as no one wants to hurt each other and wants to impose themselves on each other, that's what liberty is going to look like. That's what a civil society is going to look like. A bunch of people who disagree and have their own little in-groups and their own little, associations that they have and disassociations that they have, but aren't hurting each other. That's what we want. That's literally what we want.
What's your opinion? I mean, I think this works for like 99% of situations. Like
Sure.
there's two issues where this becomes harder to preach because it's like you get into the weeds and the nuance. And I'm curious what your thoughts are. I mean, something you've probably seen if you've looked at Twitter at all over the past couple weeks is some people from the more conservative side kind of going after some of the more libertine types because they think that there is a push, and I think there is. I think this does exist. I'm still trying to sort out to what extent it exists,
Right,
but that there's a concerted effort to push sort of like transgenderism or like drag queen story time or stuffing dollar bills down people's
no, that was my
underwear and
line.
stuff.
Let me go ahead and stop. Keep asking the question, but that was my line. Like, it's not going to lick itself. And kids at what is, I believe, either a nightclub or a strip club at night, with all the stuff still up, stuffing dollar bills into people. Yeah, no, that was my line. If the line hadn't been crossed before that was certainly my line. But anyway,
because I agree that there's a as much as I share the criticism of a lot of that movement with my fellow conservatives, my libertarian sympathies always kind of view this as like this is a tension between like parental rights and like where do you draw that line? Like, should we use the government to interfere with what parents do? And I'm like, you got to be really careful with that because
we're both anarchists, right? We know that government is a bad way of doing stuff. So like, even if I'll say, okay, listen, this is my line and this needs to be stopped, we know that getting government involved can make it way, way worse.
Yes.
It can potentially backfire and make it worse. It's why I consider myself, and this isn't, I want to get back to your thing, but an example of that is abortion. I'm with Harry Brown when it comes to abortion. I hate abortion, which is why I don't want to ban on it, because I think a war on abortion is going to be just like the war on drugs and the war on poverty and the war on terrorism.
That was the other issue. I was like, it was like this issue, like the trans stuff and like the abortion issue are the two issues where like it's the hardest to kind of have that like live and let live thing.
Well,
so
let's get back to abortion in a second, but I want to address this because the shorter answer is I'm not 100% sure where the line is, man. I'm glad that I don't have kids right now, because I would, or at least I shouldn't say that. I'm glad that I don't have to deal with this, because I do think that, you know, I've seen the ones that people get upset about where it's just like someone who's dressed up in drag at a library reading a kid's book. That doesn't really bother me. I'm not sure I'd have my kid go to it, but the people that are like, oh, that's grooming or whatever, they're dressed as a woman. They're not like doing sexual stuff. It wouldn't be, from a sexual standpoint, any different than a woman dressed as a woman doing it. It's just, it's an odd thing. I could see myself saying, I don't want my kid around that, but I can also see people going, yeah, I do want my kid around that. That thing with the nightclub and the dollar bill stuffing and the stuff that I've been seeing where like at middle schools, there are people showing up and doing essentially strip teases, but they keep some of the clothing on. Like, that's not cool at all. And I would not want, if I had a kid in that school, I'd pull them out of it. That's it. And if it was a non-trans woman, you know, dressed
the issue is less.
It's not,
the issue
it's not
is less
the
about
LGBT
the trans
part. It's the adults being sexual part and the hey kids, give them $1. Like, that's not cool. That isn't cool. Now the question becomes, at what involvement do I want government? And I think instead of getting into the what government should or shouldn't be enforcing, I think we can take an even further step back and say, this is what government being in charge of education looks like in the first damn place. What parents said they wanted this?
Yeah, that's
even the ones that are okay with it. Who was waking up and going, you know what, the thing that I'm really worried about, Jacob, it's not inflation. It's not about whether my kid can get into a good school and be able to have a good job. My kid is not being exposed enough to kind of mildly sexual drag queen content at school. And that's not, something's got to give there, Jacob. Like, no one wanted this. This was government busybodies who are checking off a diversity, equity, and inclusion thing. And some group is like, hey, we got an idea. And they go, yeah, all right, that's less for us to have to do. This is what government looks like. And so I think the better answer to, like, specifically this type of stuff is keep government the hell out of it. Government shouldn't be involved in schooling. And this is a textbook example of why. Same thing with this, like the trans kids debate. Do I know what is or is not a good idea for gender affirming care for a young person who identifies as trans? I have no clue. I have no clue at what age level. I'm pretty sure that I can tell you, I don't think actual body modifications is a good thing before you're an adult. I'm increasingly doubting that getting hormones involved, which are not fully reversible, like they say, is a good way of dealing with it. But I honestly, I gender affirming care, like acknowledging that what they say is true. I don't know, but I do know that government will screw it up. Yeah. I know that we've got some governments that are mandating that your kids get this if they even, say to anyone that they think they're trans, and then the parents not even being allowed to know because they might be bigots. You never know. And then on the other side, you've got threats in like Texas, where they're calling the police and CPS or whatever they call it in Texas, child protection, on parents of teenagers who are openly trans and aren't even having surgeries or anything else. So government is just, and what they're doing in both cases, if you'll spot the pattern, in both cases, either for the more traditional side or the more libertine side, they're both arguing that the parent is doing something bad, and so the government should be in charge of it. And I got news for you. That's going to end poorly for everyone. So I don't want government involved. And I think if we take a greater step back, we're looking at the fact that government involvement is what led to all these stupid debates in the first place.
Yeah. And really, like, when you just go back to what government is, which is just, men with guns compelling people to do things. It's like
Monopoly on violence. Yeah.
these are really awful situations to try to come up with solutions for. But it's like I don't know how just throwing in the same way. It's kind of like when people go like, "Oh, public education is failing. Let's throw more money at it." Like that doesn't really solve the root of the problem. And the same way, just throwing a bunch of men with guns into the situation to say like, no,
it's definitely going to fix the trans kids debate. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly. So it's a very tough issue for me because I definitely, and again, it's like I'm always careful to try to like, because sometimes things are exaggerated, some things are taken out of context,
Right.
and over reported, and I never want to like, it's really easy to follow.
Oh, you don't want to
into
feed
that,
into
like,
the frenzy, right?
yeah, I don't want to be a reactionary, which is
Yes.
which is a danger that I see a lot of other conservatives fall into, and I try to avoid. Not always perfectly, but I do my best. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, I do think I do feel like. I mean, for me, what I would do is like, yeah, pull my kids out of that school and homeschool them. I mean,
Why are your
heck,
kids
my
in
kids
that
are already
school?
homeschooled. I'm not even putting them in there in the first place.
Exactly.
For the people like, so like the only argument that I see some people make is, well, not everyone is going to do that all at once or even think that as an option. And is there room for like, triage in a sense, like in the battle right now, until we get to the point where the government's out of this? Should we at least tell public schools that like, okay, you can't do, X, Y, and Z that we should all be able to agree are really, really bad? And I'm like, yeah, like, that sounds reasonable.
Sounds good. It sounds good.
Like the devil's in the details. Like, you
Yes.
got to approach that. Like at the very least, if you're going to do that, approach it. I would say approach that from your local level government. It's probably a lot better than trying to approach it from Washington or even approach it from your state level government.
So Rothbard talked about this. Rothbard talked about this, and I'm sure other anarchist theorists have talked about it ad nauseum, which is sort of the idea of the closest approximation, right? Like if we're not going to be able to press the Rothbard button to make government go away, and we are stuck with a state in the meantime, how do we, if possible, try to get the closest approximation from the state of what would have happened absent the state? Well, that's a slippery slope if there ever was one, obviously. But I think the answer to that in this case is maybe we should be letting these kinds of decisions, which are largely cultural decisions, be decided as locally as possible. Because now, if who knows, man, maybe we find out, and I'm just saying hypothetically, what if we find out that our concerns and again, this is hypothetical. We find out that our concerns about some of the stuff that's going on with trans kids was completely unfounded. It was the best way to handle it, and we should have been accepting it all along. Why don't we try that as a test bed in local areas and see if it works? Instead of, if it turns out that it's an absolute nightmare and a terrible thing that leads to generational harm of children, then that was happening locally. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all program. The other part of that is it's also more responsive. You are far more likely to get your school board to change course, even if it means replacing every last one of the school board members, than you are to get something changed at the state level once mission creep has set in, once there's an entire cottage industry of rent-seeking lobbyists built around it, much less at the federal level where it's basically permanent and becomes a part of our society that we're told we could have never lived without before it was implemented a year ago. So I think we need to just be on any of this stuff as local and as granular as possible.
The ironic thing too is that a lot of the more right-leaning libertarians, and I consider myself somewhat right-leaning, although I'm not like purely like, it's I hate putting things in boxes like that. Because temperamentally, I'm actually more left-leaning, so it's kind of weird. Psychologically, I have all the traits that you would expect of, which makes sense because I started out as a registered Democrat,
Bernie bro, yeah,
Bernie bro. So, but so a lot of the right-leaning libertarians will talk all the time about high time preference versus low time preference behaviors, and I'm just like, okay. I was like, let's talk about high time preference behaviors then. Like, if we lived in Ancapistan. And your solution to any imperfection in society is, let's band together, travel, miles away, and enforce our set of rules upon people. I was like, not only are you not in Ancapistan anymore, now it's essentially becoming a state. But with a high
Oh,
time
no.
preference, because
No.
instead of trying to, did we cut out for a little bit there?
I lost you for a second, but you're back.
Yeah. But yeah, instead of trying to like solve the problem in ways that will actually solve it, you're like, no, we don't have time to try to solve this in a well-reasoned, well thought
Holistic
out
way.
way.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like, brute force, just rain men with guns down on the problem and stop. Like
Mhm.
that doesn't work. Like, and I think the problem is like a lot of people, and this happens all over the place, not just on the right, I think. It's this sort of like Nirvanian fallacy where people are just
Yes.
like, and it's like, but like, then you're showing to me that your understanding of libertarianism is shallow, because it's not utopianism. Like, no one's saying that we eliminate
Nothing.
the state
No.
and all the problems in the world went away and we don't have complicated issues like this trans kid debate or abortion debate that we still have to kind of think about and solve in our individual communities and as a society. No, there
As a
will still be,
holistic issue. Yeah. Yep.
these are still going to be like contentious issues, but
Yep.
all the anarchist and the libertarian is saying is trying to use the state to solve these problems is a bad idea. That doesn't, we're not going to have utopia, and we have to learn to try to, like, even if you're convinced that you have the correct answer, it's like, well, then you need to, through the market, through social cooperation, through effective messaging and advocating for what for what the truth is, push that into society, and that actually solves the problem in a meaningful, more long-lasting way than if you just try to correct the problem through fiat.
Well, that's the reality of high time preference decisions, right? Is that
Yeah.
in desire to have this quick or perfect thing, you end up making things worse very often and making the problem last longer, which feeds into your preference to get it fixed immediately. And so we end up going from crisis to crisis, like we have right now, right? And I'm glad that you've made that connection, that it's a high time preference, and it's also this really weird, almost childish utopianism. Like whenever I start talking about guns, inevitably someone will show up and say, "But what are you going to do to make sure that no shootings happen?" And I'm like, "You mean ever?
Right. Yeah.
How am I going to make sure that no one ever shoots anyone?" And let's go even further, because shooting is just
Well, it's a good
a
thing
means of doing.
police never shoot
No,
people, first of all.
no, well, of course not. But yeah, I mean, let's go past shooting, because shooting's only one way to kill someone, right? You're asking me, how do I stop murder from ever happening,
Right.
and then being shocked that I don't give you a satisfactory, here's how I'm going to stop all murders? That's how used to the pandering of politicians people are.
Yeah.
Think of the cognitive dissonance of realizing, everyone realizes there's no such thing as utopia, right? Like anyone who's having these conversations realizes you're never going to make murder go away. You're not, but yet they will get angry if you don't pretend along with them that there's some utopian strategy to all of this. If you actually say, listen, murders are going to happen, rape is going to happen, assault's going to happen, theft is going to happen. We're trying to figure out a way to reduce it as much as possible and empower people to protect themselves from it as much as possible, and to remove the systemic harm of systemic murder and systemic theft and systemic sexual abuse, like the TSA and things like that. Like, we're trying to talk about how that is how to do that, and they're upset that we're not playing into this like pandering political, well, yes, we're going to fix all of this for good, you'll never have to worry about the cost of anything ever again. And it's childish. It is we're not participating in their childish fantasy.
Well, someone's comment here was we don't want to eliminate the state, just a million HOAs. It's like, okay, let's say that's the sort of like that weird in between anarchy and minarchy society that we move towards. Well, it's no longer an HOA if that HOA then like forms a militia and starts invading and conquering other
Right.
HOAs to
Now it's a
impose
state.
their rules.
Yeah,
Like
it's a
that,
microstate. Yeah.
like if you're gonna have like rules within a private community, go ahead and do that. I personally don't have a problem with that, but they stay within your private community, and they have to
Yes.
be enforced, ideally through contract and private property rights, not through
Yes.
the initiation of force. So
And so the problem
that's the
with
difference.
HOAs, it's a huge difference. It's also the difference between what an HOA or free association would look like in a stateless society and what it looks like now. Let's be clear. The problem with an HOA isn't that they have standards. It's that they will often get petty dictators who work with the state to enforce their petty Keystone Cop dictation on you. That's the problem. Again, it goes back to the government and the state. If there wasn't that power of, like you said, men with guns willing to show up and enforce this stuff, now they're just your schmuck neighbor telling you, it says that you can't do this, but really it means you also can't do this. And you go, no, it doesn't. It means this, and I'm not going to listen to you. It's that they can get the police involved. They can get you hemmed up in the courts. That's what causes the problem, right? So again, if we're going into what stateless societies would look like, your HOA would be a voluntary free association group. Would there be some need for enforcement of things? Yeah, there would, but it wouldn't be the state, and it would be beholden and accountable to the stakeholders in that community, which is not what policing is. That is not what law enforcement is. So a perfect example of this, I have where I live, I've owned homes in like much more strict HOAs. Never do that again. The home I live in right now, my home right now, we have it's an HOA on paper, but there's no monthly dues. Every couple of years, they'll send a letter around and say, hey, we're gonna clean up the signs at the front entrances, and we've got someone that's we'll usually have someone that volunteers to keep the front landscaping look good and stuff like that. And every once in a while, they'll ask for a donation, and if everyone gives like $20 or whatever, it pays for the cost of it. And they raise that easily because when $20, who cares? Some people give more. We don't have a common amenity, so there's not ongoing fees or anything like that. There's a master deed, but it's very, very basic. Like it is not, it's pretty much what the county zoning is. We don't really have a lot of additional restrictions on it, and everyone gets along. And every once in a while, some busybody will come around and go, we need to ban Airbnbs. And we'll say, no, we're good. We haven't had any problems. That's some fear you have. If we have a problem, we'll deal with it. But that's your thing. And so it doesn't happen. Someone else comes along and goes, from now on, all the homes need to be at least 3,000 heated square feet. And we go, well, no, our homes aren't that big. And if we had a fire, we'd have to spend extra money to make it. We're not doing that. And so like every once in a while, some busybody will come along and try to rile everyone up. And we'll be like, no, we like it here. It's good. And the power, it's not that the people in this community, some of them aren't also busybodies when it comes to like government and what they think government should do. It's that we have a good status quo here. We like it here. We like how it's working. So when someone shows up and goes, you know what, the problem is blah, 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 we're all like, or most of us are like, there is no problem. This is something you don't like, so you don't do it. And that's worked out very well. Now, imagine if there wasn't even a state with the threat of possibly looming over us of enforcing that. I think that would be a great way to run a little mini micro society.
Yeah, 100% agree. So way back when I initially invited you on the show, which was way before Reno, it was because of I wanted to get a little bit into the abortion stuff again, because of the leak about the decision that's upcoming on Roe versus Wade, which we got into this a little bit the last time you were on, but I think this is an issue again, kind of like the other one, where I think people on both sides kind of get it wrong. Because they and this is, I'm curious for your thoughts to connect it back to Reno too, on the deletion of the abortion plank. Because as much as the deletion, the proposed deletion and then change of the bigotry plank, I think there's a lot of nuance and maybe like good faith positions on both sides. I think
there was no compromise to be made on abortion. It was
I think that was like 100% the right move. And because I think that now I was on a podcast last week and they were debating this and they were saying like, oh, well, the plank before was effectively neutral. I was like, there's a lot of people that it paid lip service to the idea that like, well, this is a hard issue and there's good faith arguments on both sides, but and then like regurgitate the idea that like effectively
government
like a pro-choice argument, like government shouldn't be involved. And I was like, that's just like, that's so now to be fair, in a sense, I sort of agree with that statement, but the problem is everybody is going to like, how do you define government? What do you mean by be involved? Like it's such a nuanced thing that like, I think it is better to have that be removed. But
okay, so
let's talk on that first.
Yeah. So here's my take. I was not in favor of removing it, and not because I thought it was neutral. I thought that it was. It definitely wasn't neutral because it says government shouldn't be involved. Well, that's essentially the, I guess, pro-choice argument. Like I said, I don't consider myself pro-choice because I think we need to be doing so much more focus on how to reduce abortions. I am not, safe, rare, and legal. I am not celebrate your abortion. This is a terrible societal problem that we need to deal with in voluntary societal ways and in looking at how government is making it worse. I consider myself a pro-choice person that is sick and tired of people wanting to create a war on abortion that would inevitably make the problem worse and lead to more abortions. So the reason that I was in favor of the wording and keeping the wording there is I don't want government to be involved. I think they will make it worse. And here's my thought on that. So in order for this to stand up long term, like legally in court, they're going to have to say essentially that prior to being born, that you have 14th Amendment equal protections under the Constitution. That's going using the system of government imposed on us through the constitutional system. That's going to have to be the argument they make, and which means at some point they're going to have to say sometime between conception and birth. Probably just conception, but maybe they'll pick some arbitrary time in between then, third trimester, with brain activity, heart activity, whatever. They'll have to pick some point prior to birth at which that is now a person, a recognized human being that has all of the same equal protections as you or I would have. Here's what that leads to. My mother had to have, I believe, 7 pregnancies before she was able to have me. 7, I believe it was 7 failed. I was either the 7th one or she had 7 ones.
Right. Every
Probably should find
miscarriage
that
is a
out.
criminal investigation.
Not only is it a criminal investigation, Jacob, at some point they're going to say, listen, you keep creating constitutionally protected people knowing full well that they're probably going to die. That's not happening anymore.
Oh, yeah.
And the only way they're going to be able to enforce that is through licensing. And you know what happens with licensing? You have regulations. The cost of everything related to it goes through the roof. You build a rent-seeking cottage industry around it. You build a black market where people continue to get abortions because the demand didn't go away. And you end up in a situation where and you can already hear it now. I know it. You can already hear people go, listen, if you want to have a pregnancy, you need to go through the legal process. It's not safe for a kid not to have an illegal like you can already hear it, right? That's what's going to happen. And it'll be inside of one generation that people will talk about the anarchy that was when you could have a child without having to get permission from the government and register regularly about it.
How can we have civilized society if people just can have kids willy-nilly?
Just having kids willy-nilly, and the government doesn't even know if you're taking your government mandated prenatal vitamins. You know that's what's going to happen. And here's what's also going to happen. You're going to have a bunch of poor, usually single mothers who get pregnant accidentally and they have an illegal abortion because that's easier and cheaper to hide than an illegal pregnancy. And so and those were people that would have otherwise had the child. It's going to make the problem worse. And I get people that will, because I compare it to the war on drugs and the war on poverty. And people will say that's different. Abortion is not the same as drugs because it's imposing on another life and all that. I understand that. I'm not arguing from a moral standpoint. I also hate abortion. I'm saying you're going to make it worse.
It suffers from the same. The instrument is just as ineffective at stopping the one thing as it is stopping the other. Is the main argument.
Terrorism is bad. Right? It's not. Terrorism is a bad thing. Blowing up buildings and hijacking airplanes and massacring
20 more years to end the war on terror.
Terrorism's bad. We're not arguing that these wars are always on things that are good or that the government shouldn't be involved in. We're just saying they suck at it. Poverty is bad. These things are bad, right? Drug dealers, cartel gangs, they're all bad. Having a war on it creates an environment that maximizes a black market that is for the worst people in our society to become billionaires off of, simultaneously criminalizing otherwise peaceful human action. And if you want to argue that abortion is not peaceful human action, fine. It's not peaceful human action, but you are criminalizing something. And what you're also doing is ensuring that there's going to be more of it by driving up the regulatory burden and the cost of doing it the right way, and instead leading people to do it the illegal way, which is abortion. it's going to make it worse. That is my take on it. I understand why it was removed. It is truly the more neutral thing to do, to just not have it there and to let individual people do it. I don't think we should be neutral on it. I think that even pro-life people should be acknowledging that government sucks and that we should not be advocating for or missing an opportunity not to advocate for government getting involved in something that we know they're going to make worse.
So like, part of me agrees with you, and then part of me thinks like there's nuance, I think, to be found. Because the Libertarian Party is not just the anarchist party. We have minarchists, we have
Yeah,
constitutionalists,
I understand.
we have federalists.
Mhm.
You know, and you know, I would. So it's like I have to make arguments that I don't believe in, right? It's kind of like, so listen, I
Well,
don't
to be
think you can.
fair, I mean,
Yeah, it's like I don't think that it's possible, or I think that at the very least, I think it's highly improbable that you can pass laws that have enforcement mechanisms that aren't ultimately going to be tyrannical. Now, if you do it at the local level, I guess it's a little bit better. And so some minarchists will be like, oh well, what if states ban it, or what if counties ban it? What if the ways in which
right.
you ban it are less punitive or like criminal, and more about like you're putting restrictions around the providers, and you're putting or even like like my good friend Kerry Baldwin, who is a kind of prominent pro-life libertarian. She did a debate with Walter Block at the Soho Forum on the topic of abortion. And she kind of like kind of agrees with like you and me that like, yeah, like a war on abortion would be terrible. And at the same time, it's like there are different models of justice that are being experimented with in different areas at the local level. Like
Mhm.
in some places in Colorado, they're using like a restorative justice model. And she's like, well, I guess at the local level, if you had some kind of like, laws banning abortion, but they were, not done with the police state we current have. So it's kind of like, okay, well, yeah, if you can
Yeah.
imagine a minarchy that wasn't a police state and had different enforcement models, like I guess, but my I can't help but flex anarchist and go like, that's a lot of
It's that right.
it's a
Like
lot of what
that's
it's
the
a lot of
problem.
what ifs.
And
At
you
the
could
same
and you could
time, the only thing I'll say is
yeah.
I don't want to impose my anarchist sympathies on the entire
Right.
party. So it was
Yeah.
like, the abortion issue is so complicated, but I think that's why I kind of favored the removal. Now, I wouldn't want a pro-life plank being put in it because I think that would be
No, of
just
course.
as
Yeah. Just being
problematic.
neutral. I
Yeah,
get
just
that. Yeah.
being, I think we actually have true neutrality to say, like, listen, everyone, like you and I can make our arguments. If somebody wants
Yeah.
to make an argument in favor of some kind of enforcement against abortion, like we can do that, and people are more free to not join the party and feel like they're being forced to take on a position that they
A
might not
pro-choice position.
necessarily agree on. So
I
it's
get it. I
definitely
get it.
nuanced, the issue itself, but the
It's
plank removal I think was mostly good.
It's extremely nuanced. It is not as cut and dry. I think it's cut and dry that government sucks at everything they do, and so we shouldn't be advocating for it. I do think
Yeah.
there is a minarchist slash classical liberal argument to make towards saying government shouldn't be involved. But regardless, there's also obviously a minarchist slash classical liberal argument to make. And I know the argument. The argument is
Yeah.
that if government is to exist, it is to protect the lives and rights of all people in it. And if I am someone who believes that personhood begins before birth, then that clearly means that government should be doing something about that, whatever that is. And yes, it doesn't need to be necessarily
It's
a
the
war on
something that
abortion.
the devil's in the
Something that
details.
they're
What's
doing.
that something going to be? Because it's
My
usually yeah.
something usually ends up becoming like the worst nightmare, right? But
Yeah.
my concern is the nature of abortion and how to regulate it. Roe v. Wade was, in retrospect, going to be overturned because it was decided poorly. It was decided as like this like privacy rights thing. Well, if we're arguing that there's another human being involved, then it ain't a privacy right, right? But it's going to get challenged, and it's going to make its way back to the Supreme Court at some point, and they're going to have to make a hard decision. It's going to come down to, does the 14th Amendment apply here? Are these constitutionally equally protected people? And if so, when? Is it
Yeah.
because if it's at conception, I know a bunch of people who are they used to call them test tube babies. You're not supposed to call them that anymore. In vitro babies, right? They were
Oh yeah,
born through
yeah,
in vitro fertilization. Well, the reality is the vast majority of embryos are discarded during in vitro fertilization. So that'll be illegal, right? So now you're actually anti-life. You're not creating human lives because a bunch of embryos are going to get destroyed in the process. It's a very difficult thing, man. And again, yes, I'm like you. I'm an anarchist, so I keep going back to the government sucks at everything they do model. But I do think even from a government should be doing some things model, which is hard for me to grok because I don't
yeah.
believe that. But even from that model, I think there's still an argument to make that because of the nature, it is different saying we're going to enforce a law saying that you, Jacob, can't kill me, Spike, and vice versa. It becomes a lot more sticky and difficult to be able to try to enforce if one of us is inside gestating of the other one, right? Like it's
Yeah.
different and we all know it. And so it's just like you said, devil is in the details. It was not a deal breaker for me. I tried to see if there was some wiggle room. There wasn't. You either think government should be involved or you shouldn't. And really, honestly, the compromise between that is we just don't answer. So I understand why they did it. It's not a deal breaker. I haven't left the party. I wish it had stayed in because I do think we should be making the argument that government sucks at stuff and that this is a perfect example of how government could make things. I look forward to being on conservative shows and then bringing up abortion and me talking about how just like prohibition of alcohol blew up in everyone's faces, so would a war on the war on poverty, so would a war on abortion. Like I look forward to talking to people who hate abortion as much as me about it.
It's also the opportunity cost. Like how much money and energy is going to go towards trying to just through fiat stop it all versus like what if we put that same amount of money and efforts towards like helping women, because I think most women don't want to get an abortion. They either get pressured into doing it for economic reasons or their families pressuring them, the partner's pressuring them. It's a vast minority.
And they know that if they have the child, that child gets put in the foster care system.
Yeah,
which is
and our abortion laws are incredibly ridiculous. It's like you can't just go to. It's very hard to just go to someone, and even if you knew someone in your community that wanted a baby, the state's so involved, you can't just go, "Hey, I want to get my baby to them." It's like, oh, well, we got to get our fingers in here first, and do all these. It's crazy.
If we focused our political activism on making common sense reforms on adoption and the foster system and possibly even getting government out of foster care, but at the very least getting rid of some of these absurd, it costs tens of thousands of dollars to legally apply for an adoption. It's stupid.
Crazy.
Fighting that and looking at the economic reasons. The vast majority of times that women get abortions, it is for economic reasons. And we need to look at things like getting rid of occupational licensing laws, getting rid of overly burdensome taxes that always end up hurting the poorest among us. Getting rid of the war on poverty, less inflationary spending policies, eventually getting rid of the Federal Reserve, things that actually drive down the cost of living and drive up economic opportunities, liberating, we call it liberalizing or libertarianizing the economy, so that more women can afford another child. Because I think something like half of the women who get abortions are parents. These aren't baby murderers. These are parents. They just can't afford another kid, and they don't want the kid to be put in the foster care system. And in that moment, with this child that isn't even possibly thinking or breathing yet, they think, you know what, best thing is probably just to abort it. And I hate that, but I understand why they do it. And I think if we looked at alleviating the issues that lead to abortion, that would be so much of a better use of our time than trying to figure out how we can create a new black market for criminals.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the woman, the mother is the one with the most power to protect that baby's life, and the one who kind of makes that final decision. Like all the laws in the world, like she can still through the black market end up, in front of the mirror holding those pills in her hand, and she's the one that has that power to decide. It's like, even if we could objectively say that, oh, if she takes the abortion pills, that's morally wrong. It's like, okay, I agree. I think it's morally wrong, but like, just again, it's like, I don't know. At some point,
it's still happening.
I get tired of moral pontificating about like if we just loudly condemn like this is bad. It's like, and then we put it on it is.
If you are implementing policies that at best will not solve the problem, and at worst will make it worse, but allows you to say, well, I have spoken out about this thing, you are literally virtue signaling. It is not helping the problem. Let's address helping the problem. With that said, I understand why they removed it. We are not now a pro-life party or a pro-war on abortion party. We're just letting individual candidates, individual activists, individual members, and so forth give their opinion on it. And I'm certainly not stopping doing that. Like I said, it wasn't a deal breaker. I wanted to keep it there because I don't think government should do anything. I want our platform to be as close to explicitly anarchist as the rest of the party can tolerate.
I hear you.
So,
I hear you.
But I get it, and it was not, like I said, it was not a deal breaker. There was no way to do a compromise there. That kind of already was the compromise between the pro-life position and the pro-choice position. The only additional compromise there could be was just saying, you know what, we're not even going to answer that. You get to decide for yourself what your libertarian take on abortion is.
I agree. So I guess the last subject we can talk about here, I wanted to get a little bit into your, personal religious views, because I haven't heard you talk about this a lot on. Maybe you have, I just haven't seen it. But like my show, I like to, other than talking about current events and stuff like that, obviously, I try to connect my faith and the Bible to libertarian ideas, anarchist ideas, show compatibility there, and even in general, just trying to show in general how people of faith, because sometimes people will look at religion and be like, oh, you can't be an anarchist and be a Jewish or Christian or whatever, because no gods, no masters, and it's like, nah, whatever. And that's not a majority by any means.
That's anarchy. We're thin. There's thin anarchy, which is just no imposed authority that we don't accept. And then there's I guess thick anarchy, which is we don't even accept the idea of a heavenly authority or whatever.
Right. So what are your personal religious views, and do you in any way connect any faith or spiritual beliefs you have to your libertarian philosophy?
So this is so the reason I often don't, and I'm happy to talk about it, but the reason I often don't talk about religious stuff is I have found that it's a great way for people to argue about something that we have no control over. It's actually worse than arguing about politics, because at least arguably you could try to change something. I grew up in the Messianic Jewish tradition, or first century Christian tradition, which is basically Jews who believe in Jesus, not Jews for Jesus. There's a distinct difference there that I'm not going to bother getting into, but Messianic Judaism. That was what I grew up in. Over time, I it's interesting because as I fell away from the belief part of it, the faith part of it, I actually got more into the tradition and the oral and spoken tradition part of it. So it's like, as I got more away from the actual faith in a at least the Abrahamic description of a higher power, I actually got closer to the actual the traditional part of it. I'm much more active now than I was when I was a believer in Shabbat and in dietary customs and things like that. And in fact, it was actually that faith and the, I guess, remnant of that faith that informed my becoming an anarchist. Because when you look at Tanakh, when you look at Tanakh is, when you look at the Bible, because that includes the New Testament, but especially when you look at the Old Testament, it's basically a series of stories about how God told people, just follow me, just trust me, just listen to me. I've got this. I control the entire universe. Just freaking calm down and let me handle this. And everyone's like, no, we need a king. Oh, please.
Yeah.
We need someone. Look, they got a king. They seem happy. Let's go have a king. And God's like, okay, well, listen, if you have a king, this bad thing's going to happen. And they're like, yeah, give us the king. And they're like, okay, but if it's like a Larry David thing. It's like, it's just like, well, but if you do this is going to happen. And they're like, okay. And then it blows up in their face and they get, scattered for centuries and all. It is a series of stories of what happens when you don't trust God, and instead you just want to go off and create your own man-made law. So to me, my introduction into anarchy was really diving into that and going, well, that makes sense. And, maybe we shouldn't have people ruling over other people. I will say over time, I kind of did a common path of people that are coming out of Abrahamic faiths where I call it the dual, and this is not an offense to people that believe, but I call it the dueling mythologies. There's the first mythology or belief, which is of the sort of paternal God who controls the world and is watching you and wants to make sure you do the right thing, and you have to listen to him or there's going to be problems. And then a lot of people who kind of walk away from that fall into what I call the second mythology, which is the uncaring, mechanical, meaningless world where you are basically just this really, really weird, unfortunate fluke that not sure why you're here, but it's probably not good. And there's no real purpose. And the logical conclusion of that is if you're not having a good time, you might as well just end it because there's no reason for you to be here. Well, that over time made less and less sense. So I would say from a belief system standpoint, what I believe now or what I lean more towards probably is more in the realm of like Taoism or Zen Buddhism, if you had to pick something. With that said, I cherish and am grateful for the tradition that I came out of. And when I look at historical figures, and this is almost unequivocal, that when you look at historical figures, you can't find someone who more embodies, not just as libertarians or anarchists, but just as good, decent people, how someone should be to others than Jesus. Right? Like,
Yeah.
There's little dispute that he wasn't an historical figure. The dispute basically comes down to, was he really the Messiah and the Son of God and the part of the Trinity and so forth. But whatever your take is on that part, here is someone who almost indisputably was one of the best examples of how a human should be to other humans ever. And obviously, if you believe he's the Son of God, well, that would make sense. He's the Son of God, right? Like, of course, God's going to be the best example of how people should be. But if you don't believe that, well, then that means here's someone who isn't immortal and still did all of that sacrificial stuff and still was there for other people. So I will say that, even despite my lack of the faith in Abrahamic faith that I previously had, I still believe that the example of Jesus is, if not the best, probably I would say the best, but certainly one of the best examples that anyone, whether you believe or not, can look at of how should someone look at their role as a person in this world, in this society, and in how we should interact with one another. So that's my take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. You brought up, kind of like the Old Testament theme, kind of starting in 1 Samuel 8 with like, we want a king and, all that. And I talk about that a lot. That's
Yes.
certainly, a very important theme that I think connects, sort of Abrahamic, all Abrahamic religions really, because they all believe, at least in that story, that connects Abrahamic religions to libertarianism and anarchy. But Jesus, there's also there's so much there in the things he said and the things he did. One of my favorites, because some people will kind of go like, well, no matter what, you're going to have authority, right? You're going to have people who rise to the top of hierarchies in society, and they're going to lead people. And it's like, listen, I agree, but what is leadership? What is authority, and what is good leadership and authority? And I love the answer Jesus gave. He said, if you want to be the first among everybody, if you want to be a leader, you have to humble yourself and be a servant. And he washed his apostles' feet.
And he did it. He then did that. Yes,
right.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's not just like he was a really cool dude who, if you drink the Kool-Aid, he was the Son of God. He was divine, and he humbled himself to that.
He's
to that
washing
level.
prostitutes' feet and stuff like that. Here is someone who's literally embodying the ultimate in humility and telling people, do this, right? Do this in my stead, do this as I'm doing it. Here is how you can help people, right? I think that he's, like I said, to me, he's the best, if not one of, if not the best, then one of the best examples of that. There was something I was going to say, and I'm blanking now, but a lot of Christians will get caught up in, is it Romans 13 that talks about, God, I saw the look on your face. It's Romans 13 that talks about.
Let me show you my
Yes, but my Romans 13. Yes, exactly. So this is, it says to submit to authority. No, it says to submit to godly authority.
Right.
And then it lays out very clearly what that godly authority is.
Exactly.
the logical conclusion of saying, oh no, it says all authority, well, then that means that anyone who resisted the Third Reich was a bad person.
Right.
Anyone who tried to any slaves who tried to flee their captors were bad people. In fact, Romans 13 was given as a justification for fugitive slave laws, that they weren't obeying God's law to obey their godly authority. Like,
the apostles didn't obey the authorities.
Thank you.
They got stoned by the authorities. Jesus didn't obey the authorities.
It's a bad argument.
The name of my podcast, Daniel 3. I mean, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego didn't submit to the
They
governing
literally
authorities.
disobeyed the authorities. Yes, and so and they'll say, well, but that's so it means the duly appointed authorities. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Okay,
yeah, but what does duly appointed mean? Yeah,
look at the wording of when, and keep in mind, this was written. Was it Paul that wrote it?
Yeah,
when he was captive.
Yeah,
so he was writing this out in prison, knowing the censors were going to look at it. So this guy has to be a little slick, right? Like when he's writing this. And so he's saying, listen to the authorities, listen to the godly appointed authorities, because they do this and they do that.
Right. They're not a terror to those who do good. They're a terror to those who do evil. And it's like, cool. I always tell people, can you please find me, like, this is the challenge. Find me one state that lives up to Romans 13.
Any line from this. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I say. I'm like, listen, you show me the government that qualifies for this, and I'll obey them.
Yeah.
But we both know that doesn't exist, right? So
right.
that is, and this is where a lot of people will get caught up on the other side of saying, well, Christianity is inherently statist. And it's like, not really. You could argue that. So people will argue that Jesus was an anarchist. I think it goes deeper than that. Jesus wasn't about any man-made systems at all.
One of my kingdom's not of this world, is what he said.
Yeah. Jesus was, straight up telling people, like, give all your money away and sell it, give it all to the poor, and go follow me barefoot and walking around washing people's feet. Like, he was on a different level. So to try to box him in, I mean, forget the fact that he's not a Republican or a Democrat. He wasn't a libertarian. He wasn't an anarchist. He was like he was on a completely different, whether you think he was the son of God or not is irrelevant. He was on a completely different wavelength.
Yeah.
And we should not be trying to compare ourselves to him unless we want to go and do that crap. Like, if you want to go and wash everyone's feet and own nothing and like it and go around the world and remind everyone of their failings and why they need to change the way that they interact with every single human being in their life, knowing that everyone's going to hate you saying that, then you can talk about what Jesus would want. Otherwise, maybe we should just not try to pretend that Jesus fits into our paradigm of politics.
Yeah, agreed. And then there's a comment here that biblical Israel was an anarcho covenant. And like the book of Judges was essentially like several 100-year period of Old Testament Israel where they were just basically living now. And then some people go, oh, but look at what happened at the end. There was this big war that broke out and bad things happened. It's like, yeah. And then they got a king and everything was great. Like, no more wars happened after they got a king.
Yeah, no, that was fine. The Jews are best known as being the most plentiful population on earth, having a huge expansion of land that we have control over. Someone asked me, we talk about Jews all the time, and then they looked it up and saw there were only like 30 million Jews or some ridiculous. Like, there's like next to no Jews compared to other and they're like, why is that? I'm like, because we get genocided every like 50 to 100 years. Like, this is the longest stretch. I just found this out, starting in like the 90s. This is the longest stretch since the expulsion that Jews have experienced, living as an overwhelming minority among an overwhelming majority Gentile non-Jewish population, that we haven't been rounded up and killed or exiled. Yeah. Which is good. We got that going for us. But the point is, you should not be looking at the Jewish empire as an example of, but the Jews did it. Yes, how did that work for them?
I don't think they even claimed the entire promised land. Like the when it was originally defined, like the borders of what God promised them. I don't think at any point in their history they obtained
ever had anywhere near that. No. It's most of the, we talk about the Levant. The Levant, it's like it goes all the way to like freaking Iraq or something. Like it's supposed to be this gigantic territory. They've never had that. They've never had that. So if we are applying biblical principles, that leads me. I will tell you, it was biblical principles. It was what I was taught growing up and what I was taught in Tanakh that more than anything solidified my ideas behind anarcho-capitalism and a society based on free association, as opposed to an imposed uh, uh, manly authority, right? So the manly authority is, or the human authority is, well, this is what we believe, and if you don't do these things, you're going to go to hell, which in the Jewish tradition isn't eternal necessarily, but it's still pretty bad punishment. Okay, so then I still get to choose, right? So yeah, it's only moving forward later on that they started saying, yeah, well, we want a king, and God's like, sure,
Literally says
yeah,
like you will fight on the front lines of all of his wars, and he's gonna
yes,
take like I always love like he said, I'll take a tenth of all of your crops and harvests. And I'm just like, gosh, can we
yes.
go back to that at least? Can we just go back to when the government took
Oh,
a
it sounds
tenth of my
so
stuff?
much better, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, we're already fighting in their wars, but they only take a tenth of what we have, and every 50 years we get a jubilee. And then every once in a while, someone's wife gets taken, if she's pretty.
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
That's
th- th-
that's
I love that. Like
better.
the best king they had, a man after God's own heart, and like
Yes,
still kind of wasn't that.
murdered
Yeah,
someone so he could have his wife because she was pretty. And I
yeah.
and I like that, by the way. That's another thing that I really like about the and I don't know if this is true of other religious faiths because I'm not as well versed, but every single figure in the Bible fell short at some point.
Yep.
Like all of them. If they had any kind of more than just a supporting role, and even some of the supporting roles in the Bible, Old and New Testament, really did something really terrible, like Moses, Noah, Abraham, like straight up lied that his wife was his sister to try to get, like, I mean, like all of them did something terrible, sometimes lots of terrible things. And we're still told, yeah, but they were actually good people. In other words, everyone falls short, right? So the only person that didn't do that was Jesus. And that's the whole point of it, is that, the only, and there's an underlying story there as well, which is that you can't be God unless you're God. You're not going to be perfect unless you're God, which means that maybe you should, as Jesus put it, deal with your own stuff instead of, dealing with the mote in someone else's eye. All of this goes back to libertarian ideas. I'm not saying Jesus is a libertarian, but it goes back to the idea of mind your own business, do not hurt other people, do not take their stuff. Let people live their own lives as long as they're not hurting you. If you want to live in association with others that follows your very strict values, and great, do that. But let other people live their lives as they see fit. Stop trying to create a central authority. It's
Oh yeah.
going to make everything worse.
Well, and it especially irritates me when, Christians and especially Christian, I guess Christian progressives in a different way do this too. But it's like, Jesus said to go out there to preach the gospel and to, what you've done to the least of these, you've done unto me, to serve the
Yes.
widow, the orphan, the downtrodden. And I'm just like, cool. I was like, please show me where in what Jesus modeled and what he taught that I'm supposed to go centralize power and point guns at people to compel them. Like, no, that's, if anything, the reason why the Jews, at least like, at that time, sort of rejected Jesus was because they were looking for a political Messiah
Yes.
to overthrow Rome
To
and to
overthrow
usher
Rome.
in a new kingdom of man. And Jesus said, like, no, like, I told you, hundreds of years ago that wasn't going to work. It still doesn't
Yep.
work. We're not doing that. Like, we gotta get out of, if anything, even if you don't believe in the metaphysical or spiritual truth of the Bible, it's a great story. I think among all the different lessons in there, there's a great
Yep.
lesson about the myth of central planning. Like
Absolutely.
it just doesn't work. So it's like God's the most
Absolutely.
sovereign of all, and he can't even get, like, he rescues the Israelites out of Egypt, and he's just like, hey, just hang out on the bottom of this mountain and don't do anything stupid while Moses goes up to the top of the mountain. And like they just
They
witnessed all
immediately
these,
started doing, yeah.
immediately. Like and after, like, if you believe in the what it says, like they literally saw acts of God deliver them from slavery, and they still can't, like, so it's like,
Like 10 minutes. Like, I'm gonna go up here. I'll be right back in a day or two. And they're like, let's worship a cow. Like it's a great story of, and I liked I will say of the different ideas behind, different Christian thought, whatever. I like the reformist take on certain things, not all things, but on certain things, because the reformist take seems to be, a lot of these, especially the feel good non-denominational churches, are like, they'll start comparing you to like Moses and stuff. And they're like, oh, you had haters? Well, so did Jesus. And it's like, nah, it's not your haters. You might actually be a jerk. I don't know. But
Yeah, maybe.
like, they'll like start comparing you to like the heroes of the Bible. And whereas the reformist take is, nah, you're probably like one of the unnamed people who's running around shrieking and like losing your mind and like immediately worshiping a cow the very second they weren't looking at you, right? Like statistically, you are likely to be like someone who was like, okay, cow time, like, that's probably very, maybe you're one of the rare few that's the Moses or the whatever, but it's actually likely they weren't. And the purpose behind that is, I think a lot of people get disabused into this notion that there are these powerful, good people that we're going to find and they're going to fix it all. We even do it in the liberty movement, right? We're looking for liberty Jesus. I get told all the time, you're the one that's going to fix this. And I'm like, no. And or they'll say, or not me, they'll say Dave Smith is going to fix all. Justin Amash is going to fix it. And I'm like, no, these are great people and I think they're going to do good things, but this is a movement. This is not going to be a single person drives us to victory. And we don't even believe that's how things work. But it's such a pervasive mythology that people have, but it's high time preference and it's utopianism. It is, I just need someone to fix this. But the reality is that's not how we got here, by trying to do that. And we're not going to get out of it that way. And I think that whatever your religious background is, whatever your side you take, and we've been talking about the social stuff, whatever side you take on these things, if we can distill it down to something very basic, very intuitive, that we tell kids, don't hurt people, don't take from people without their consent. And if we distill it down to that, understanding there are still going to be disagreements, understanding that everyone's not going to live this way, there are going to be people that try to infringe on others, and we need to be able to protect ourselves from them, understanding that this is not going to be a utopia. But if we try to get as close towards that ideal as possible, that I think that we live in a better society, a safer society, a freer society, a better educated society, a healthier society. Every way that you could measure the health or well-being of a society will do better. If we focus on that as libertarians, I think that all we can do is go up from there. But it starts with, and this is why I started You Are the Power. We need to realize that no one's coming to save us, and that's okay, because we're the ones that are going to save us. We are going to be the ones that do the work on the ground to fix the problems that we
pick up your cross and you know what I mean,
and walk with it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Literally pick up your cross and walk with it, and set your communities free. Show people how it's done. If you don't know how it's done yet, there are people in the movement that are ready to support you and show you how it's done, and then you can do it too, and you can join them in doing it. We're going to fix this. We are our heroes. And I think if we look at it that way, whatever your background is, the reality is, if we look at ourselves as the heroes that we're going to need on the earthly realm, obviously, if you're a believer, there's something far bigger than any of this that, it is a much more important thing than, your day-to-day life or whatever. But on the earthly realm and the mortal coil of our existence, we're our heroes, and we're the ones that are going to fix this. And that's what we're doing every day. If you want to find out more, you want to be a part of it, you want to, join, become a part of the fastest growing liberty movement that's out there right now, and get support from some of the biggest names in the liberty movement, and to help push it forward and set our communities free one issue at a time. Join us at youarethepower.net. We'd love to have you. Membership is free. We certainly could use any donations that you're able to give. Running a political organization does cost money, but we want members. We want people that are involved. That matters more to us than your money. So we would love to have you join us. youarethepower.net. And Jacob, I appreciate you having me on, man.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you coming on. Sometimes I view you as like libertarian Jonah. Sometimes you're sent to Nineveh to try to,
you're all wrong.
Yeah,
all of you are wrong.
Yeah,
I don't even want to do this.
Yeah,
I just got spat out by fish. They wouldn't let me just go take a nap. So here I am to tell you that you're all wrong. Can I go home now, please? Yes.
But listen, I hope you know that you are appreciated, and we, a lot of us, I think that you can serve to be a voice of reason and uniter, and I hope that I know there's some people who refuse to stop fighting, but there also are a lot of people who hear your calls for everyone to, take a deep breath, go touch some grass,
Stop ripping each
and
other to shreds.
yeah,
That's all I ask.
yep. So
Yes.
I appreciate everything you do. Where can
Absolutely.
people, You Are the Power? Is there a website or anything?
Yeah,
Did you, I don't know if you
so the
plug already?
website is youarethepower.net. We are
Okay.
also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, with more coming soon, and that is YATP official dot, or they're all at YATP official, or if you just look up You Are the Power, you can find them. And our website is youarethepower.net. If you want to follow me, I'm on social media, Spike Cohen, on all social media, and I'm even on TikTok for the kids. And my website is spikecohen.com. And if you want to follow the podcast that I do, that's on Muddied Waters Media, muddiedwatersmedia.com, or you can find Muddied Waters Media on all podcasting platforms, all social media platforms. And again, thanks for having me on, man. I always love talking with you.
Yep. Thanks, Spike. Thanks everybody for watching. And until next time, don't fear the fire.